Field. All right. All right, everyone. Welcome to training. As people come in, I'll go ahead and admit them. I asked David Field, who is a settlement attorney and a friend, to go over the information on what's going on with the new NVAR contracts, both the residential sales contract as well as the listing and buyer's agency agreements and the implications. So I got another one coming in of what's going on. I've got a PowerPoint which I'll share with everybody. David also has some information. Anything that David wants me to talk to as far as being a broker, I will. But I respect David. He's been with MBH with Champion Title and is doing some work on his own now as well. So welcome everybody. And David, let me just go ahead and while you're giving yourself a little bit of an introduction, I'll go ahead and put the PowerPoint up.
There. All right. Okay. All right. I'm unmuted now. All right. My name is David Field. I'm an attorney. Been an attorney for over 40 years. Kind of frightening. And I did real estate settlements in Prince William County for over 20 years. I don't know how many. I can't imagine how many real estate settlements I've done, but it has to be close to 1,000. Maybe that's underestimated, but in any event, so yeah, I've been doing this a long time, and I've taught a ton of classes. I've taught a ton of classes with Mark, and so you know, that's me.
Okay, can everybody see the presentation?
I think everybody's muted, so
yes, yeah.
Do a thumbs up or something.
Okay, can you see it, David?
No, yeah, I can see it. Yep.
Okay, good. All right, you're off and running there.
All right, so you can go to the next page. So yeah, the things that have changed, at least we're talking about today, that I've got my outline here, is paragraph 27 of the residential sales contract, which is added definition of business days. I think it's just really made it clearer to people, frankly. I mean, because lawyers know when business days start, because we kind of are taught that and everything, but I think that some people are sometimes confused about what a business day is. And paragraph 3 with regard to the deposit, and paragraph 4 with regard to the settlement date. And then paragraph 8, the Resale Disclosure Act has changed. I've got an outline back behind me, but I should have looked at it before because I went to the real estate CLE back in, I guess it was April maybe. So I've got like a thick thing of all this stuff, but I didn't look at it today. So anyway, and then the listing agreement, there's some changes there, 2 time periods, agreement term and listing term. You have to enter the listing in the MLS within, hold it. I think, all right, you can leave it there. That's fine. Within 2 days of the listing term. Go ahead. You can switch next. Commission lawsuits, NAR settlement. I mean, I do kind of keep this up because I look at the news every day. I haven't seen anything in any of the news feeds that I've got, basically, that this thing is being fully implemented. I think it's supposed to be implemented in July, and it got pushed off to August. But I think the best thing to do is kind of assume it's being implemented and just act accordingly, because they've added all the, changed all the forms and everything. So you're probably better to err on the side of a caution and just obviously use the new forms. The new listing agreement changes. Paragraph 6, the listing broker compensation only is listed in the listing agreement. New paragraph 6B, additional listing broker compensation for unrepresented buyer. I'll talk a little bit about that. That's optional. New paragraph 7, seller paid buyer broker compensation, which is also optional. And then new paragraph 8, seller subsidy, which has always been optional, but they've kind of moved that around. Residential sales contract, paragraph 2, new line for seller payment towards buyer broker compensation and third-party beneficiary language. Buyer broker agreement, paragraph 8, broker may not receive excess compensation beyond what they've agreed to, and checkbox direct broker to request seller contribution. All right, you can go next. So we'll actually have these things up here in a minute, paragraphs. Mark, you can switch.
I know I had to, there we go.
All right. Form change 1, residential sales contract, definition of business days and resale disclosure act. All right, next. Probably talking too fast. All right, the things that are kind of smudgy, looking smudgy, are things that have been highlighted before. So those are the changes. So business days means any day that is not a Saturday, Sunday, legal holiday, or a day on which the state or federal government offices, should probably be federal government offices, but anyway, I didn't write this, are closed. So yeah, I used to get calls all the time from agents like, can you count Saturday as a business day? And I guess that I'll have to see. I'm not sure that changed, but I know that in terms of the review of the ALTA, Mark may be able to speak to this, but in review of the ALTA for the buyer, in terms of compliance with the requirements about having reviewed the ALTA, you have 3 days after the ALTA is provided to you as buyer to review the ALTA. And Saturdays are included if your lender is open for business on Saturday. But if your lender is not open for business on Saturday, specifically, I think for those kind of loans, like in other words, if like they have tellers on duty in their banks, but they're not doing any other kind of business, I'm not sure you can count Saturday. But you'll have to, and your buyer will have to make sure that they understand that with their lender. But that's kind of what I remember. Days means calendar days. Not sure why people would think it mean anything else other than calendar days, but it means calendar days. All references of delay refer to the Eastern time zone of the United States, which kind of makes sense because we are on the Eastern time zone. So yeah, you can't use California time. That would give you a couple extra hours to do everything. The first day will be the day following delivery. Now this is something that you probably all know all these things, but anyway, this is something that as an attorney, that the computation days start the day after delivery. But some people don't realize that, so they specify that basically first day of the day following delivery, the time period will end at 9 p.m. on the day specified in the contract. The deposit, buyer's deposit, the amount of blank dollars, check, bank wired funds, and or by note, due and payable on blank, will be held in escrow by the following agent. I don't think very seldom have I ever seen somebody execute a note payable on a certain date, but I would think that would be situation, but that would probably be when somebody actually had to move money into a different account and they weren't able to do it that quickly. So they basically execute a note that's due and payable within like 5 days or something after it's signed, so they can move the money around. So the escrow can be held by the settlement agent, which is probably the best place to keep it usually. The buyer's broker or other. And the buyer's delivered deposit escrow agent will deliver deposit escrow agent by so many business days after date of ratification. Now that, I guess, Mark, that used to say just within 5 days, right?
Right. And
But
so
now
that's a big change.
That's a big change, right?
Yeah.
Because I know at the Champion, we started up a system where, because people used to bring in earnest money deposits to our office all the time in Woodbridge, and we actually started a system. I got to take a drink. I'm drinking Diet Mountain Dew. I hope that doesn't offend anybody. But we set up a system where we had forms that when the buyer came in, they had to fill out listing who their agent was, how much the deposit was, and the property address, and obviously their name. We would then put our file number on it and make a copy of that, and we retained and we dated it, obviously the date we received it. So if there was any question as to when the buyer provided us with the earnest money deposit, we actually had a written paper documentation of when that was delivered. So anyway, I guess you can go to the next paragraph because it goes on, I think. I hope that's, well, actually it's cut off. But anyway, basically what I think the part that's cut off at that last screen is basically, obviously the buyer fails to deliver within the proper amount of days. The contract is voidable, I think, if I remember correctly, the language, voidable at the seller's request. Not automatically void, the seller actually has to void it. Resale Disclosure Act. Seller represents that the property is or is not located within a development is subject to the Virginia Property Owners Act. And seller represents the property is or is not located within a development that is subject to the Virginia Condominium Act. My observation about that is it's just so funny that people hate homeowners associations. You know, people used to come in all the time and like they were always griping about homeowners associations. Some of them, like mine, I'm actually the president of my homeowners association, and we only charge $50 a month. And unfortunately, when they set up my development, the originator of our declaration didn't put any enforcement provisions in there. So there are all kinds of things you can violate, but we can't do anything about it. So it's kind of annoying sometimes because people contact me and say, "Can you do something about this?" I'm like, "No, sorry, can't do nothing." So that's a problem because I won't go into how hard it would be to fix that, but it would be a problem. So let's see here, subject provisions of 55.1-2317. Any contract for resale with unit in common interest community shall disclose the unit is located in such community. The seller or the seller's agent is required to obtain from the association a resale certificate and provide it to the purchaser or the purchaser's agent. So that's new. It used to be provided to the purchaser, but then there used to be squabbles all the time because they said, "Well, I sent it to the agent," you know, and they were like, "That doesn't count. You got to get it to the purchaser." Now, so now the purchaser's agent can accept it. But obviously, if you're the purchaser's agent, you need to make sure you timely provide that to the purchaser, not, you know, kind of sit on that. So you have to make sure you check your emails all the time. I'm sure most of you do.
David, one of the things also that has arisen is that there have been HOAs or management companies that have said, "Well, I know what this says, but you know what it comes down to is we work for the homeowners association, and the owner is the homeowner is the member of the homeowners association. So we're not going to do it until you give us the information for him." And there were homeowners association management companies that were basically using it as a delaying tactic, or you know, saying, "Well, it's not in the contract, so you're here, but it's really the seller, and so we need more specifications." So that was one of the problems we found out too.
Well, that doesn't surprise me. I mean, you know, some of these associations, especially if they're like a association that's run by the residents. Like mine's run by the residents, but we only got 3 officers, you know, so thank God some of the other guys do all the hard work because, you know, they have a disclosure package and everything. But yeah, sometimes, I mean, I know in history, going back, I mean, can't specifically talk about specific homeowners associations, but I know that frequently people would have problems with being directed, the person is supposed to provide that to them, and the person's going, "Well, you know, I'm too busy to do it right now, and you know, I've been whatever." So yeah, that can become a problem. The purchaser has the right to cancel a contract. Well, go back.
My fault.
Okay, no problem. The purchaser has the right to cancel a contract pursuant to 55.1-2312. These are all Virginia Code sections, by the way. I'm sure you know that. The purchaser or purchaser's agent has the right to request an update of such resale disclosure in accordance with certificate 55.1-2311, and the right to receive the resale certificate and the right to cancel a contract or waive conclusively if not exercised before settlement. Yeah, so you can't go to settlement and say, well, gee, I'm here at the table, by the way, I cancel. Now, in my experience, having done this for 20 years, I've only had one contract. I mean, because obviously sometimes people just use the homeowner's docs to get out of the contract. That's an easy escape. What happened? What happened? Oh, my computer freaks out sometimes. What is going on here? I get this thing here. Mark, I don't know what happened. Did I lose you?
No, I gotcha.
Yeah, let me try and sign in again here. Come on.
Yeah, you're here, David. Do you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but I'm not, I don't seem to be in anymore.
Yeah, you are, as far as I can see. Yes, you're here.
Oh, I'm back. Okay. All right. I don't know it. I don't know. Um, um, I don't know. Anyway, so yes, my computer's kind of weird. Try closing some applications to improve. All right, let me close a couple things. So my computer's kind of griping at me, I think. Close some things. Let me close this. Let me close this. Close. All right. Well, I don't know what it's telling me now, but anyway. Um,
Should I go to the next slide?
yeah. Yeah. There you go.
Go ahead.
Okay, there you go. Well, too far. Okay, stop. The provisions of 55.1-2312 allow for buyer cancellation of contract on the following circumstances within blank days. It used to be 3 days, but you can agree to just about anything. And I suppose if the seller has some, and you obviously need to kind of schedule this out in terms of how you want your dates to run. But if there's some history of difficulty getting a resale disclosure package from this particular homeowners association, you can obviously put in more days than 3, obviously, but so that's kind of now flexible. That's changed. So many days of the ratification of the contract, purchaser receives a resale certificate, whether or not complete, or notice the resale certificate is unavailable on or before the date the contract is ratified. Within blank days from the date the purchaser receives the resale certificate, whether or not complete, or notice that the resale certificate is unavailable if delivery occurs after the contract is ratified. Sometimes that gets a little dicey because I've known, this is something, once again, you kind of have to just be, I guess, on top of what's happening in your contract, because I know that there's been times that people have called me up and they haven't gotten a response at all from the homeowners association. And they're like saying, well, they're not saying it's unavailable, but they're not giving it to us. And the question becomes, if they haven't given it to us, does that mean it's unavailable? So therefore we can use this particular provision in the contract saying we haven't gotten it because it's unavailable. So you kind of have to watch that language in there. And it says, or at any time prior to settlement, resale certificate is not delivered to the purchaser. It defaults to 3 days, so you got to make sure you fill those out. Fill out all these blanks in the contract. You got to watch that too. Pursuant to 55.1-2307, for the purposes of the paragraph, ratified real estate contract includes any addendum to the contract. The unit is governed by more than one association. The time frame of the purchaser's right cancellations will run from the date of delivery of the last resale certificate. Yeah, some of these places, I mean, I'm sure you probably know this working in that market, but Mark, what is it? Over in Montclair, there's that one place that has 3 associations.
Yeah, there are 3 associations.
And you got to be careful about that because as a listing agent, I mean, there's many a time that, unfortunately, I had settlements where basically, because the listing agent depends on what the seller tells them at the homeowners associations. And I mean, I've seen sometimes where, or tell us really, because we're kind of dependent on what the seller tells the settlement company about who to contact in order to get the information about the resale, about the dues and stuff, and the resale disclosure package. And so you just got to make sure that the or the settlement company is provided with the accurate information. All right, you can go on to the next one, I think.
Here I go. Wait 1 second.
All right, go to the next one, because that's just like the introduction thing.
Yeah.
Agreement listing term. This is for the listing agreement. Oh, that was confusing, somebody said. What is that about the homeowners associations? Okay, well, Mark, let me go over it one more time. Basically, the way that the settlement agent or the closing company is told who to contact, because what happens is the settlement company will order from the homeowners association due statements, and the settlement company uses those due statements in order to prepare the ALTA. I guess I mentioned it. So in order to prepare the ALTA, so in order to basically have an accurate ALTA, the settlement agent has to have correct information about all the homeowners associations that apply to that property. And the settlement company depends on the seller filling out a form advising the settlement company as to how to get in touch with the get in touch with the homeowners associations. So what happens sometimes is, because people, I don't know what they're thinking, but anyways, sometimes in the past, as a settlement agent, we've only gotten information about like one homeowners association, or maybe there's two. Or in the case of the place over in Monte Rosa, which Mark can kind of throw the name out, I forget what's called, whatever it is. But anyway, over in not Monte Rosa, Montclair, there's one that's got three homeowners associations, because there's like the swim club and this and that. And sometimes we've only gotten information for two of those. So then what happens is that either we find out at the last minute that there's another association that we have to account for that we didn't know about, or what happens is we collect what we think we're supposed to collect, and then suddenly the new buyer gets a letter from the association going, hey, nobody paid us. So point being is that when the seller fills out the information form for the title company, they have to make sure that they provide the title company with the proper information and complete information to contact all associations that apply to that particular piece of property.
Hey, David, can I ask
Yeah.
a favor?
What's that?
Because I don't want to go too long. Just hit the information on the changes with the listing agreement and the contract.
Right.
We
Okay.
can
Let
have
me
a
see
training
here.
on some other things later on, okay?
Okay. So you need to flip this next page here. All right. Stop. All right. This is about the listing agreement. The agreement will run from the period commencing by signature by all parties, expiring at 11:59, basically midnight, more or less, on such and such a date. So however long your listing agreement is going to be. If left bank, agreement automatically terminates 90 days after the agreement date. Sales contract for properties ratified during agreement term, which provides for settlement date beyond agreement term. Agreement term be expended automatically until the final disposition of sales contract. So, if it takes longer for you to go to settlement than your listing agreement says, then you're still good. The listing term begins when seller instructs broker to allow any potential buyers to learn about the property. So that added language. Listing term shall go into effect on or before blank day with the exception of the expiration date coinciding with the expiration date of the agreement term, or extending as provided above. Listings shall, and this is, I think they've added this, it's just like they've added, listings shall be entered into MLS within 2 days of the start of listing term, or as MLS requires. It's understood the listing term effective date may or may not coincide with the agreement date. All right, next. This I can hardly read, but here we have, this will probably, Mark will be able to give this to you because I think it'll be better. So, do you have a listing agreement? Do you not have a listing agreement? Let me, I've got it here. So I'll look here.
So the bottom line to it is that when it comes down to it, and here's a QR code from Bright MLS, is that it used to be that, you could do coming soon up to 21 days. Now, essentially, you can do it as long as you want. Plus, there's Bright MLS paperwork, which I sent out to everybody, sent something out to you about. But the bottom line to it is that if you go to this, there's a flow chart to help you understand if you sign if you sign the listing agreement today, but it doesn't go on the market until August 23rd, what's the flow chart? What are you required to do under Bright MLS rules? So this can get, this is better than having David or me, go through it. Take a look at
better than
the
me.
code, and you can go to Bright MLS, and because it's time consuming and it's confusing based on the settlement. It's better if you just sit there and look at it, and I can field questions later.
Okay. Are you going to the next page then, I think?
All right. Just giving everybody a chance to do the QR code if they want.
Oh, right. Okay.
Got 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right. This is the National Association of Realtors Settlement Terms. 1, eliminate any requirement that MLS participants must make offers of compensation to the buyer brokers in MLS listing. 2, prohibit MLS participants from making offers of buyer broker compensation on the MLS. 3, require MLS to eliminate broker compensation fields and prohibit sharing of offers of compensation to buyer brokers via MLS. Oh, it was on the prior screen, Leanne.
I'll send it to you, Leanne.
All right. And 4, agree to not facilitate any non-MLS mechanism for making offers of compensation to buyer brokers. Complete reversal.
Can I jump in here a second, David?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So essentially what's going on here is I've seen on a couple of different chat groups in Facebook. Well, why don't we all just decide that we're going to put in the central lock number of the central lock, and the first 2 numbers will be the compensation. Well, that makes it illegal. You can't even put it on on your comments, because we can all alter Zillow and some other things in their comments. You can't even put it into Zillow or Realtor.com, etc., because they are Bright MLS affiliated. So that that becomes a situation. Now, if you have flyers or buyer's guides, etc., in a home that's available to people, that's not Bright MLS affiliated. So that's up to you whether you want to do it or not. And for the agents that are not Fathom on here, I'd have the discussion with your broker. For my agents or Christine's agents, I think just come to Christine or myself, and we can talk to you about this.
So what about emails, Mark?
So we can email. So if an agent emails us and says, hey, I got a client that's really interested in your home at 123 Maple Street. Is your seller willing to pay a buyer broker commission? And you can answer that once you have discussed this with your seller. But what it really comes down to is, which is currently somewhat of a violation of the Realtor Code of Ethics, is that we are now using the contract to do the negotiation on compensation. And so one of the things you'll find here coming up here in a few minutes is the fact that whatever is on the listing agreement that our sellers tell us on buyer compensation and seller subsidy is non-binding, and it all goes through the contract. So
Okay,
take it
so
away, David.
all right. So basically, it's based on the contract always, right? Obviously. All right. Okay, you can go on to the next page. All right, this is still part of the settlement terms. Paragraph 5 here, require MLS participants working with a buyer to enter into a written agreement before the buyer tours any home. And I think that was always our practice here, wasn't it?
Well, not to tour and not to just tour a home, but this is now the reason being is it's now nationwide. There were a lot of states that didn't have a buyer agency agreement. And
Oh,
so that's what this comes down to.
Right. And that was part of the problem, right?
Yeah. And so Zillow just came out and it says it's VA compliant. It's Virginia compliant, but Zillow at one point had not too long ago had a one-page agreement with the to show a home with a prospective buyer, and Virginia deemed it VAR deemed it not compatible or not fulfilling Virginia's legal requirements. Well, I just read today and clicked on it, and there's now a new sheet that says it's VA compliant. I'm going to tell you again for my agents, when this is for number 5 here, before you show a property, I'm going to tell you use a buyer's agency agreement. And I frankly don't care if it's for one property, 5 properties, for a day, for a weekend, whatever. But I would rather you use the 5-page buyer agency agreement than a 1-page that might not end up standing up to scrutiny.
Well, plus it's always, if you're going to act as somebody's agent, you should have it in writing.
Yeah. And in comprehensive terms.
Right. All right, number 6, buyer broker agreements must include an ascertainable payment amount. Obviously, cannot.
Yeah. So for my agents, you can no longer say per MLS because on August 14th, there is no per MLS anymore.
Right. Buyer broker can only receive compensation from any source in the amount stated in their buyer broker agreement. Prohibits agents from advertising their services as free. Like the Joker said in Batman, if you're good at something, never do it for free. Brokerage agreements must disclose that commissions are fully negotiable. Buyer brokers must not filter listings based on the existence or level of compensation or offer to buyer broker. In other words, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious, but you just can't decide what you're going to show if your buyer says, gee, I'd like to look at that house and you don't like the compensation, you can't say, well, you don't want to look at that. So anyway, I mean, I don't want to malign people, but I've often wondered, maybe everybody does this, but anyway, I've often wondered if people are actually had previously been always advised that the compensation was negotiable, but this is actually, you're forced to tell them it's fully negotiable. Anyway, go ahead on the next page, please. All right, next page. So, all right, listing broker compensation. Listing broker compensation and buyer's broker compensation are fully negotiable and are not fixed, controlled, recommended, or suggested by law or any multiple listing service or association of realtors. All right, so, and this, of course, is, obviously, you can figure out that this was kind of directed at getting rid of the standard 6% thing there. It's not recommended by anybody. Listing broker's compensation. Seller will pay broker blank percentage of the gross sales price, or a flat amount, or percentage of the gross sales price plus X. That's to be the broker compensation. During the term of agreement, anyone produces a buyer ready, willing, and able to buy the property. Broker compensation is also earned if within so many days after the expiration termination agreement, a contract is ratified with a ready, willing, and able buyer to whom property has been shown during the terms of the agreement, which, means that, the buyer can't wait, or you can't wait for I guess it's the seller really, can't wait for the term of the listing agreement to end and then suddenly say, hey, that guy that came in, sorry, compensation part of that, not 12B. All right, let me see here. However, the broker compensation need not be paid if contract is ratified on the property while property is listed with another real estate company. Mark, can you clarify that language a little bit?
So, are you talking about the broker compensation is also earned within?
No, the last paragraph or last sentence, broker compensation need not be paid if the contract is ratified on property while the property is listed with another real estate company.
So basically, if we get fired, or if you get fired, and they sell the property, we're not owed anything, even if somebody comes to them through that we originally came to them through us. So we get fired, which would never happen because we're so spectacular.
Or if they let your listing agreement expire and say, well, you didn't do anything for us, we don't like you anymore, so we're going to hire this other real estate company. And now, when that company is listed the property, they bring in a buyer. Then you're not owed anything, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, fortunately, I haven't had that problem at all, really. Anything I've ever worked on. All right, so you can go to the next page. All right. Listing broker compensation. You can see the highlighted area there, which additional listing broker compensation for unrepresented buyer. If anyone produces a buyer ready, willing, and able to buy property, and such buyer is not represented by a broker at the time of ratification of the sales contract, seller will pay broker the following in addition to the broker compensation: percentage of sales price, or flat fee, or percentage of gross sales price plus X. This is a new optional section, allows for additional compensation. Listing agent if buyers unrepresented. Check the box if this section applies. Remainder 6 is the same: variable rate compensation, listing broker service fee, retainer fee, early termination. Now, my interpretation of this, Mark, is that basically, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that basically what you're setting up is a dual agency. I mean, the seller's paying the broker additional compensation, presumably because the buyer has no representation. Therefore, the listing agent has to do more work to kind of put everything together. It seems to me that that's kind of creating a dual agency. Do you disagree, or?
Well, what they're saying here is if the buyer comes as an unrepresented buyer, and there is no dual agency, then what ends up happening is the seller has to agree that. So, for instance, and since there are other agents from other companies, I can't use numbers. So let's say in the listing agreement, your seller agrees to pay you X if the buyer, if a buyer ready, willing, and able to purchase comes to you. You go, okay, great. But what if somebody comes unrepresented? You're willing to pay somebody else a commission for the buyer agency. How about if I get somebody unrepresented, will you compensate me as well? So they go, yeah, I'll give you another Y% or X% or X number of dollars or whatever. So this allows them to agree to, if somebody's coming unrepresented, which I believe is probably going to happen fairly often now. Strictly my thought process is that you will get not only the listing part, but what might have been offered for compensation for the buyer.
Right, but my question would then be, and maybe there's not a clear answer to this, but my question would then be, under that scenario, what duties does the listing agent have, if any, to the unrepresented buyer?
Nothing. That would be the customer. That was it. That'd be it.
Okay, all right. Just to make that clear, and anyway, so okay, go ahead. You can go on the next page.
Going over there now.
All right, seller paid buyers. Now, this is obviously new. This is part of the agreement or the settlement. Seller paid buyer's broker compensation. Seller paid buyer's broker compensation is an amount seller will pay to any broker representing buyer in this transaction. Seller will pay buyer's broker the following amount: obviously, percentage of gross sales price, a flat fee, percentage of gross sales price plus a dollar amount. Buyer's broker compensation is payable on settlement. Seller understand that buyer's broker compensation is negotiable, ultimately to be determined by a ratified sales contract between seller and buyer. So this is where the seller is agreeing to pay the buyer's agent a fee, which of course you can't put that on MLS, what that's going to be. That's something that would have to be disclosed, like as Mark spoke about. I think probably it'd have to be between the agents on some non-MLS platform, such as an email. So I would think that probably, I mean, I guess if you tell them on the telephone, that's not MLS, because they're probably going to call up the listing agent and say, am I going to get paid anything? Now I think that my just thought is that basically, obviously, you've got to be forthright with the seller about, how this works, and, whether they have to pay. They don't actually have to pay anything, whatever. But I would think that, buyer's agents are not going to be particularly, I mean, I guess this kind of is a bind based on what we just talked about in terms of that the buyer's agent wouldn't be reluctant to show a property based on the compensation being offered by the seller.
Right.
I think later on, we're going to get to a point of a document where the buyers agreed to pay their agent a certain amount of compensation for finding the property. Yeah, so this is kind of, this is kind of one of the new conundrums we're going to have as a result of this, is that basically, um, you cannot show a property because the compensation is not high enough. But presumably the buyer's agent has already negotiated compensation with their buyer, which is the way it's going to have to work now, which has always kind of been the way it's worked, more or less. But anyway, but now it's kind of like not automatic, and the buyer has to pay. And I think that, anyway, let's go to the next slide, because
Can I ask a question related to the last slide?
sure.
Okay, so, and Mark, this might be for you too, more so for you. So if we're transitioning over to the new listing agreements, and we have a seller that puts X amount on the new listing agreement, and then we're inputting our listing into the MLS, I don't want it double counted, because I know that's been the issue with it being in the MLS and then the new contract coming in, and then people are writing the amount there, and you could have the seller on the line for both. So obviously we want to avoid that. So in terms of inputting new properties into the MLS, what are your thoughts on putting 0 there and putting in remarks that seller is using the new updated listing agreement and open to negotiations on the new purchase contract? Is that a yes, no? I'm just kind of trying to figure out what people are going to start to do.
And so, Julie, I understand. So, Christine, do you mind if I answer this, or do you want to answer this?
No, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So, essentially, until August 14th, so we're less than 2 weeks away, we can put everything in the Bright MLS for the listing. And yes, you're right. There is, in fact, it's going to be addressed a little later on, the fact that if a buyer broker puts a compensation in the line for buyer broker compensation, they are on the hook for both what's in the MLS and that. Okay. So you're right about that. So I'm going to tell you my thought process would be just continue to put in the bright MLS. And if you get an offer, if you get an offer in hand and that's filled in, I would let them know, hey, look, this is already in there. We're crossing it out. Or did you mean double? I would say, did you mean double compensation? When they go no, then you can cross it out. I think by definition, everybody's supposed to be using now the new listing and buyer's agency agreement and residential sales contract. Anything that's used other than that is considered out of date and settlement agents routinely will look at it as non-valid. One of the other things you're going to get to, which I'm just going to tell you, I'll give you up front, is the fact that on August 14th, you have to do new listing agreements and new buyer's agency agreements if you have old buyer's agency and listing agreements.
So if you have one that hasn't expired,
right,
you have to do a new one anyway.
Exactly.
Right.
Does that help you? Does that help you, Julia? Or is that?
Yeah, I had to do a new listing agreement anyway, which Christine knows. But my question was more, I've started to see some people do on the MLS 0, which is, I know why they're doing it, so that their seller's not accidentally double counted. And I know it's going away anyway on the 14th, but I just wasn't sure what y'all's thoughts were on putting 0 and putting like open to negotiations in remarks versus leaving it as with the.
You can still do that. I don't have a problem with that, but that again is if Christine has a problem with it. But I think whatever for the agents in Nova West and Nova South, my answer to that question, and not to go against anything that maybe Christine is looking at, is that would be fine because it's always been 0 as a possibility. It's nothing new. And you can basically say, hey, look, we're open to the negotiation based on the new regional sales contract.
And Mark, can that language stay in the remark after the 14th?
No, it
Okay,
cannot.
so it's a manual change for us on anything in the remarks section, but the compensation fields are going away whether we touch them or not. Okay, perfect.
Right. Okay.
And I don't think you can put anything in MLS after the 14th talking about compensation.
No, you can't. Nothing.
Right. So if Julia puts that in there, it's just put, note to self that that's going to be changed on or before the 14th.
Exactly.
Okay. Seller subsidy. Seller subsidy is payment of seller towards buyer's charges and closing costs, and then including but not limited to, and then this is kind of I think this is probably clarifying things: loan origination fees, discount points, buy down or subsidy fees, prepaids or other charges. Sometimes I kind of remember questions historically about what, seller subsidies could be applied to as allowed by lender. So some of these lenders will allow prepaids, subsidies to pay for just about anything. I've had lenders come back and say, yeah, it's fine. You're paying off a motorcycle or something. That's not exaggeration, but it's like, yeah, that's fine. So, you have to work with your lender to make sure what they're going to allow to be paid, but pretty much just about anything. My perspective. Seller subsidy reduces total proceeds to seller. So you have to check a box. Seller will not consider seller subsidy, or seller will consider seller subsidy, and it's either unspecified amount. I can't imagine anybody would check that box. Or blank gross sales price or a particular dollar amount. I guess to me, I think this may be, this may or may not become an issue, but it seems to me when you're kind of like basically telling the seller, because I think that for me, it always seemed like this whole compensation thing was pretty much automatic, which is kind of what it was, which basically is kind of why they had this whole big McGill about the compensation. But, now that it's kind of being brought to the fore and kind of like there's a whole big discussion about it, I'm just kind of wondering if, if the seller says, okay, well, I'll pay X number of percentage.
I think David froze. So real quick, while I've got everybody, while he's readjusting here, is so one of the things with the seller subsidy and the buyer agent compensation, it is considered non-binding. So your seller could put in there, I'm willing to do a seller subsidy of, of $10 million and buyer compensation of $75,000. Crap, hold on. So, but it's non-binding. And so since it's non-binding, Sharon, where you said that you were in a training earlier today that said that you might not, there may be changes to it. I'm willing to bet that one of the changes is that it's going to be, seller will consider seller subsidy, period. Because right now, to me, we're having a seller sign a contract with provisions that aren't binding, which makes no sense to me. So, go ahead, David, you're back. Unmute. David, unmute.
Okay.
There you go.
Sorry. Well, I was unmuting myself before. I thought you were. Anyway, so yeah, I'm back. So anyway, you go to the next page. Optional seller concession fields. Yes or no?
Basically, that's what I just went over while you were frozen.
Okay, all right, go ahead. Financing concerns, interested party contributions. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and FHA have confirmed that seller and paid buyer broker compensation will not count against the buyer. Now, I'm not 100% sure I understand what that means. Will not count against the buyer.
So if the
debt?
commissions won't count as a seller concession.
Oh, okay. Department of VA issued an interim policy on June 12th that allows a VA buyer to pay their buyer broker, which they couldn't before, obviously, because everything's changing here. Best practices avoid lender issues with IPCs. Interested party specify in the contract direct seller paid broker compensation. General seller subsidy payment could have IPC issues. Yeah, well, that's always kind of been an issue because, you got to talk to your lender about kind of how they're going to handle these things, really, as a buyer's agent in terms of these compensations. And probably you run into this before, but buyer, seller can agree to pay $75 million in buyer compensation or seller contribution, but the seller, and you got to be careful about this because the lender will obviously knock it down sometimes to what the buyer is allowed to receive. So the buyer also has to understand that whatever's in the contract of what they're supposed to get may not be what they're going to get. Paragraph 7 and 8, seller subsidy and seller paid broker cost, compensation negotiated, reasonable sales contract, case by case subsidy, same seller flexibility. Use paragraph 7 to avoid issues. Now, is this kind of a
so what they're looking at with this is
you need to go on the next page what the deal is, but anyway, go ahead.
Well, essentially what they're saying, guys, is the fact that the reason for 7 and 8 is so that there's no confusion from the lender that the seller concession includes buyer compensation and therefore pushes the seller contribution to the buyer over any thresholds, that they are completely two separate issues.
Right, because that was an issue. That was going to be an issue.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, you can go on the next page, I think. Let's see here. Sales price blanks, down payment, no financing, down payment. Sometimes I've seen people fill that down payment paragraph section out, but I don't know how people know in advance because to me, we're just talking about cash to close, not down payment. That's not the earnest money deposit. So no financing, down payment, equals sales price, obviously. Financing, what they're going to get, conventional, VA, FHA, USDA, other, second trust, seller held trust. Yeah, never let your sellers be financiers, all right? That's just my personal advice. you know, for obvious reasons. I mean, if somebody has a question about that, I can tell you, but I just would suggest that's not a good idea. Seller subsidy to buyer. Seller's net is reduced by a blank. Seller payment towards buyer's broker's compensation. So that's the new paragraph there. Seller's net reduced by, and they put the amount in there. This obligation is enforceable by buyer's brokers against seller, may be modified only by subsequent written agreement by buyer's brokerage. And, you know, written agreement means, trying to think of the law language, but it's a document with equal dignities, which means that, you know, people can send emails back and forth and say, hey, this is what we agreed to. You know, if you're changing the contract, there's something that has to be signed by all parties there too, like the buyer and the seller. So, there you go. All right, you can go on next.
So can I throw something in here real quick, David?
Go right ahead.
So again, what they're looking at within the terms of the settlement is the fact that any subsidy for the buyer and any commission is wholly negotiated and is completely divorced from basically an offer of compensation, a base offer of compensation. In addition to that, one of the things, the reason that the bottom part of it is in there is one of the questions that had come up was, so wait a minute. So what if the buyer compensation for the buyer brokerage agreement and this come to be about, and you get to the settlement table and the buyer says, and with the lender, hey, great news, I can settle. Bad news is I can't pay you. So the choice is either they pay you out of their cash and don't settle, or they settle and you don't get paid. This allows the broker to go after them for not the listing, not the seller, but the buyer for the commission. Okay, so that, you know, it basically allows beforehand, and you can please correct me if I'm wrong, David, is that we as the agents, as the brokers, couldn't sue necessarily because of the contract, but now because it's in a contract that this is being done, that we have the ability to sue.
Yeah, you can sue the seller.
Right.
The seller agreed to pay you money, and this kind of segues into the next slide, I think. Right. Obligation for, well, that's the same paragraph, but obligation enforced by buyer's brokerage against the seller. Yeah, so go to the next page, I think. Yeah, broker compensation. Parties irrevocably instruct settlement agent to pay broker compensation. The settlement is set forth in the parties' respective brokerage representation agreements. So I guess you need to send the listing agreements and with regard to compensation and stuff to the settlement agent. And, you know, sometimes people don't understand this. I mean, on more than one occasion, not many, but I actually had people either come to the table or call me up and say, well, you know, my agent did such a terrible job, I don't want to get him paid. You know, I don't want to pay him. Or I had somebody, I had somebody come in and try and fire their agent at the table, you know, and say, he's terrible, I don't want to pay him. And I'm like, well, sorry, you got to pay him. And, you know, of course, I had big runaround, obviously, but I have to point out to them that they agreed to pay him, irrespective of whether they decide they don't like him or not. So yeah. So anyway, so the title company needs a copy of your buyer broker agreement. Please send it with your contract, and obviously the title company will prepare the closing disclosure based on that agreement. All right, next page. I think you can probably go do twice. Yeah, go to the next one. Yeah. Broker compensation is fully, no, there you go. Broker compensation fully negotiable, is not fixed, controlled, recommended, or suggested by law or any multiple listing service. That just kind of is basically saying what, you know, to make it clear that, you know, there's no standard broker compensation anywhere at all. It's always negotiable. Paragraph A, buyer's broker compensation. Buyer will pay broker an amount of blank, gross sales price, or a flat fee. If buyer enters into a contract acquiring real property during the term of the agreement and goes to settle on the contract anytime thereafter. Buyer is responsible for payment of broker compensation as settlement. If broker receives any compensation from seller or seller's representation for services covered by the agreement, that amount will be credited towards buyer obligation to pay broker compensation. And then the highlighted part, which is kind of highlighted, broker may not retain any additional compensation from any source that exceeds the broker compensation. In other words, no under the table payments, please. Buyer will request seller contribution to broker compensation in the amount of blank percentage in offers to purchase property. Buyer understands the seller contribution is negotiable and ultimately be determined by a ratified sales contract between buyer and seller. And so this is kind of just, you know, obviously, what would you say? Formalizing the tenets of the agreement, which basically says that the buyer has to pay their own agent, and they can ask the seller to contribute to that, but ultimately they're on the hook for that. And my question was, Mark, you've probably seen this, or maybe you haven't seen this yet. I mean, I think one of the concerns was going to be that this was really going to, unless the seller agreed to pay buyer broker compensation, or depending on how much they agreed to pay, this would increase the buyer's cash to close at settlement. And so they might have to have more money on hand to go to settlement than they might otherwise historically, because seller or buyer compensation or buyer broker compensation was always paid by the seller. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so so I will because I can't address it here because there are agents from other brokerages, but I will be doing a video as well. I'm sure Christina, well, not necessarily a video, but Christine and I are going to come out with some direction on the forums and some guidance on how to handle some of this, because it can be somewhat confusing, but at the same time, it's got to be reflective of what we're going to do for our clients and what our clients are going to have to owe us and how we're going to address it. So we'll come out with something separate. But the other thing that has been a concern from a lot of different people that I've talked to in all the classes that I've, you know, that when I teach ABR or at home with diversity or anything like this, is that this may end up to a degree creating some fair housing violations, because if you've got a lot of money, you can pay your buyer agent. If you don't have a lot of money and the seller won't do it, well, what about your representation? And so that was one of the concerns. In fact, one of the reasons I'm going to say anecdotally in the listing agreement that you now see, well, what if a buyer comes unrepresented, which was not really a concern before, that this may drive a lot of buyers to be unrepresented. That's sort of my take on it too, is that people are going to go, wait a minute, if they don't pay you, I got to pay you, but I can't afford to do that. So what if I go straight to them? And so that's, you know, that's sort of my thought process on it. And it's not just my thought process, is what this could do.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a really bad idea, buy the house without an agent.
But what it really comes down to is that all this is to me is put in the forefront the fact that negotiations have always been negotiable. But personal opinion is, I think that the approach to all this has issued more confusion and more uncertainty than it could have if it had been handled differently. So, but anyway, go ahead, David. I'm sorry.
Well, I think the other thing is you've got to find out from your buyer how much cash on hand they have to go to settlement, you know, simply because you've got to have some kind of idea about their flexibility in terms of paying fees and things, you know, because they're going to get an estimate from their lender saying, you know, this is what you need to bring theoretically, but, you know, they've got to make sure that in case that, you know, something isn't being paid for, that some compensation is being paid for, or some subsidies being reduced, you know, they've got to make sure they got flexibility enough in the funds on hand to take care of that problem. All right, you can go on the next page. I think the next page is like a flow chart.
Yeah.
Which really kind of, yeah. Well, actually mine turned out, yours is on one page, but anyway, you're gonna have copies of this, obviously, because you can go in, because I can't really see it here, but you just gotta, this is a timeline, you know, seller concession field available in Bright, June 12th, Bright compensation fields removed, August 14th. July 1, new forms go into effect, August 17th, settlement agreement goes into effect. Remove, amend any terms of the previous broker's agreement. This is where Mark was telling you about. If you got a listing agreement already and you haven't gotten a contract as of August 17th, you need a new listing agreement is what it comes down to. I think you go on the next page.
Getting there.
Okay.
Just give me a second.
Yeah, that's right, because this is just like a schedule here. Beginning on July 1st, the NVAR recommends implementing a new version of this forms. If you pre-July 1 brokerage agreement placed during the interim period, you will not need to amend the brokerage agreement. However, please note the fine print if LA receives an offer with amount listed on seller paid broker compensation, will be in addition to any cooperative agreement. Yeah, you need to read the fine print. MLS cooperative agreement field is a separate binding agreement between the brokerages, but that's going to be removed, I think. Yeah. Once an offer is made and accepted, go ahead.
And real quick, so this says beginning July 1st. Okay, if you have a pre-July 1st brokerage agreement in place during the interim period, you will not. So right now is the interim period. That's what I want to make sure everybody understands. Right now is the interim period. August 14th is no longer an interim period.
Right. Okay, you can go on the next page, I guess, here. It's important because pre-July versions of the brokerage agreement do not fully comply with the practice changes, right? For example, buyer's agent is prohibited from receiving a compensation excess of what is agreed to. Listing agent informs sellers that offers of compensation no longer be an option on Bright MLS. Your client is unable or willing to execute a new brokerage agreement, consult an attorney to advise how to properly amend the brokerage agreement. Well, that'd be kind of interesting because if they won't execute a new one and they won't sign changes to the old one, interesting problem. So I guess, Mark, if that comes up, you can give me a call and we'll try to figure it out.
Right.
You know, I don't know why they do that, but people can sometimes be difficult. All right, you can go on to that. Are you stressed and confused yet? Yes, I am. No. Listing agreement redo after August 14th. You can use the same one now. Non-binding buyer subsidy compensation. Seller support for buyer. Those are the two paragraphs that are right as redundant docs.
Yeah, there are two docs in Bright MLS, and there was a recent Bright MLS email yesterday, I believe it was, that had the link to the documents. So it is straight out of the Department of Redundancy department, because what we have to sign those as well as what's in our listing agreement. So it basically states things that are in our listing agreement as far as compensation is also, but it also, the main thing is it talks about putting it on Bright MLS. Both those documents. One is basically an exclusive office listing, and the other is a selection of what our client wants to do as far as marketing. So you will have to have both of those documents in addition to the listing agreement.
Okay. Leave paragraph 2E blank. All right. What's on the next page here?
We're done.
Yeah, that's just about it, isn't it?
Yep.
Yep. That's it. Thank you. Next slide said thank you. So anyway, thank you.
Okay. So any questions for David? Unmute and speak up or forever hold your peace.
Hey, Mark, here's my question coming into today. And I've listened to a lot of trainings and read a lot of materials, not just in our NVAR world, but in other worlds like the Richmond world and other states and whatever. According to my best understanding of this settlement is that broker to broker compensation is still allowed, however, not allowed in the MLS.
So
my challenge is, my challenge is that our current documents, our new listing agreement, does not allow for broker to broker compensation. It only allows to specify seller paid broker compensation. Of course, our buyer's agreement is buyer paid broker compensation. So then you've got the whole world of everybody out, all the agents going, oh, well, I need to find out. I need to ask the agent, what is their broker to broker compensation? Well, we haven't given our client permission. We haven't given our client the ability to give us permission to do broker to broker compensation. So how does that fall into place? And do I make sense to you at all?
Yeah, Sharon, yes, you do. Having known you for as long as I have, yes, you do. Okay. Anyway, just kidding. So we look at if we look at the essence of, and I'm trying to get Sarah Petcher to come in and do a training for everybody on things. So the settlement basically was going to, the settlement said, hey, we're going to decouple this, but we're going to allow this, we're going to do it a little differently. And we want to make sure everybody knows that compensation is all negotiable. DOJ has basically said, no, that we don't like the settlement because there is a compensation issue between the seller and the buyer, and there shouldn't be. That should be completely decoupled. And we're going to come out with our policy in October, which does none of us any good right now. But the idea is, if you remember, if you go back to the listing agreement 12 months ago, the listing agreement said, seller is agreeing to pay, and I'm paraphrasing, seller is agreeing to pay listing broker X. And the selling broker, we're telling the selling broker will offer cooperative compensation of Y to anybody that brings, any brokerage that brings a ready, willing, and able buyer.
Correct.
Okay.
We no
So that
longer
was-
have that.
Right. That is cooperative compensation. The settlement is that they do not want cooperative compensation. It is not to be considered broker to broker compensation anymore. It is now the seller saying, listing broker, I'm going to pay you this. And oh, by the way, I'm going to pay the buyer broker, me, the seller, the compensation if they bring a ready, willing, and able buyer. So that broker to broker compensation is disconnected. That is no longer part of anything.
Right. So when I was having this discussion online with someone and I was like, well, we can't do broker to broker. It's not allowed anymore. They're like, yes, it is.
No, it's not. If the CD has always said listing compensation, buyer broker compensation.
I'm going to argue with you, Mark, and you know
Okay.
I'm going to argue with you.
Of course, Tom. Well, go ahead. I'm just telling you what other lawyers and people have told me and the basis of that. So go for it.
Because on the Virginia Association of Realtors, you still have broker to broker. And I can guarantee you that my attorney at Virginia Realtors is not going to let us do something that we can't do. Also, there are
understand
six other contracts that are being used throughout this state. And I believe all but one is allowing the broker to broker compensation.
Well, coming from Sarah Petcher and coming from NVAR, I'm just telling you the positions that I'm getting from other sources is the fact that the reason NVAR has decoupled this is because through the settlement, it's supposed to be decoupled, and because DOJ wants it decoupled.
And that's also that we've based the Virginia Realtor forms on what guidance that we've gotten from Katie Johnson, who is the legal person at NAR.
Right. So all I can tell you, Sharon, this is what I'm going to tell you, and Tom, this is what I'm going to tell you.
Even the lawyers are disagreeing.
So we're David, I know you well enough and love you well enough to know that you're going to laugh at this because you've said the same thing. Given any question, the lawyer will ask you two things. what do you want it to be? And it depends.
Well, the other thing is need more facts, but that's
Okay. So the lawyer roundtable, because I had a briefing on this yesterday. The lawyer roundtable is an advisory part of the NVAR docs committee. And their advice and with how they came to about their advice was to decouple it completely. Now, that's through NVAR, which are the forms that the vast majority of us, Tom, including you at one point, used. Okay. Virginia Realtors forms, and I'm sure Rain forms and Roanoke Valley and CVR MLS may have it to where it's a broker to broker. Okay. Now, Sharon, I guess where did you get the discussion, or where were you discussing or debating the broker to broker, on what forum?
I believe that was the Eco Title Facebook group.
But see, Echo Title, and that's who I just talked to yesterday. Echo Title, that's where they came out and said it's decoupled. So an agent in there was saying it's not decoupled, may have been looking at the Virginia Realtor forms where it is not decoupled, where in NVAR it is decoupled. The bottom line to it is that the seller, whether it's the seller paying, whether it's ours, which is the seller is paying the compensation. Okay, screen sharing is stopped. Or
I get it. I was just trying to figure out if broker to broker was still allowed, and they even have a form, a VAR form or a Richmond CBR MLS form that they fill out per property for broker to broker compensation. I'm like, well, I can't even give broker to broker compensation because based on my listing agreement from NVAR, it doesn't give me the option. It doesn't have the instructions from my seller to allow me to offer that broker to compensation anymore like it used to.
Right. And so Virginia Realtors, if nothing else, not only in the listing agreement, but Virginia Realtors Form 500 talks about broker to broker compensation. And so I've got to screen this with probably Veris Title, which is the title company, and John Kayla, which is the lawyer within Fathom Realty, to possibly say if somebody is demanding broker to broker compensation and we are using the NVAR contract and listing agreement, if the Virginia Realtors Form 500 needs to be applied to that, or because I don't want to give guidance because obviously I'm not a lawyer, does somebody want to come up and go, well, wait a minute. So in the contract, it's X%, and over here it's X%. So I get 2X. I don't want to have any of the agents run down that path.
And speaking of that, prior to, I guess, some of the most recent changes or whatever, when we first got the new forms at 1st of July, right? The guidance on the NVAR website, or Realtor, facts.realtor was saying, okay, well, if it says X in Bright MLS, that is a guaranteed, still exists broker to broker compensation. So don't fill out whatever line item E or whatever it is on the actual offer. Don't fill that out. Because then it would be a case of 2 times, right? But the newest stuff that I just read earlier this week says that as of August 14th, I think is their cutoff, even though settlement is the 17th. So that still confuses me why the 2 different dates. But now
because they can.
They're saying, yes, fill it out, whatever.
And everything I've heard says don't fill it out because now the obligation will be double. Right.
So I think we're getting some confusing guidance on what happens between now and August 14th and what happens after August 14th.
And Tom, I understand what you're saying. I completely understand. And that the other documents talk about broker to broker compensation. And what I was told yesterday was essentially that, and I'm paraphrasing, Okay, guys, I'm paraphrasing. And that is that using the information from the settlement, NVAR wanted to be proactive. And looking at what DOJ has been saying, they wanted to be proactive and decouple it. All right. Anybody else?
Mark, I got one.
Sure, Charlie.
Yeah, you said earlier the VA and FHA approved the buyers, brokers compensation being paid by the buyer.
Yes.
So
VA
can
is,
the
VA
buyer
has come out with a
finance?
direct- Huh?
Can the buyer finance that compensation?
No, it's not, doesn't do anything with the finance. So what you got to remember is a VA loan, when you had a VA loan with a veteran, VA would not allow the buyer to pay directly the buyer broker. They have since basically put that in abeyance. And I believe that's in abeyance. It's probably going to be in abeyance forever now, but until all this shakes out. But they cannot finance it like the funding fee.
Okay.
But, well, that's why I said that you got to make sure your buyer has enough money on hand to take care of these
Yeah.
things if, something goes south.
All right. Anything else? All right, guys. David, thank you very much for being here.
Sure.
And if I butcher this, I apologize because the writing is small and my eyes are great. Telekisha Morgan, are you there? I'm pretty sure I know who you are. So, anyway, thank you everybody for being here. This is recorded. I'm going to go ahead and get it formatted and put up. All right. I will take you later. Talk to you
Thank
later.
you.
Everybody.
Thanks so
Bye.
much.
Thanks, David.
No
Thanks.
problem.
Appreciate it, Mark and David. Bye.